So if you have a long journey to cover and you don't have a car, BlaBlaCar is obviously a great option. There are many other options, and it's interesting that the cars and automobiles are certainly centered around the sharing economy. Another company that many of us have heard of, I'm sure many of us use, is Zipcar. They've been around for a long time, and they were, of course, acquired by Avis. How many people here use Zipcar? I'm just curious. Raise your hands. Awesome. Well, we're very delighted to have the European president of Zipcar, Malte fellow, joining us and being interviewed by Mike Butcher, the editor-at-large of TechCrunch. Please welcome them on stage.
Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying LeWeb. My name is Mike Butcher. I'm the editor-at-large for TechCrunch. Malte Fellow, president of Zipcar Europe. It's been an interesting journey, has it not?
It has been.
For Zipcar. How many years, 12?
12 years.
When Zipcar started, was there a feeling that it would work?
I don't want to speak for the time necessarily, but I would say yes. You know, this is in 2000, and car sharing, I don't know if you know, originally came from Europe, came from the German-speaking world of Germany and Switzerland. But it was very much kind of a kind of backdoor alley, kind of dirty parking lot. You had the keys and lockbox kind of affair. And the founding proposition of Robin Chase then was to take it to the US. Where you'd say, why on earth would you do that? Everybody owns 3 cars. You know, the Americans will never be interested in sharing cars. But the approach was one where it was always about convenience. It was about getting the model right and really leverage technology to make it a fantastic experience. And frankly, that worked. I think from the beginning it was clear it was a very big idea. Why we do Zipcar today is still that we want to transform urban environments. We want to create a world where there's more people sharing cars than owning cars, and have a huge impact on the cities and how we live. On average today, one of our cars replaces 15 vehicles that were previously privately owned. So imagine, this sounds a bit funny, but imagine all the trees you can plant and all those spaces that today are parking spaces. Imagine all the congestion that will resolve. So, you know, we do think it's a big idea. We do think it's a big part of the future of how we should live in cities. And, you know, it only takes going outside to the streets of London to believe that.
You have competitors, you have clones across the world and across Europe. How do you feel that you're going to compete going forward?
We weren't the first ones, well, as I said. But what I feel really we have today is an evolving landscape of mobility. So we have lots of new kind of mobility options that are coming out. Uber and Halo are often kind of put out as you know, one of those examples. They're creating not necessarily a new way to get around because the taxi is not new, but a new way to interface with a taxi and to attack short trips. If you go to Sidecar or Lyft, or you look at Car2Go, or you look at BlaBlaCar, they're enabling new forms of transport that just make it even easier not having to own a car. It's a big step from, if you own a car, it's a big step saying, that piece of my personal freedom, I'll give up. And you get a lot in return now if you use our way of living.
You mentioned some of your competitors, BlaBlaCar, Lyft, for instance, is making a lot of waves in San Francisco right now. Why would we need Zipcar anymore?
Because they all complement each other. They all serve different trip types. If you use one of our cars in San Francisco to go to Lake Tahoe for the weekend, Lyft isn't really that alternative. Lyft is your replacement for a taxi. BlaBlaCar may be the right way to get from San Francisco to LA. So I think all of these, if they were operating there, but that model would be. Right, so all of these different forms of new mobility really compete more with the old way of doing things. I think they're each disruptive, but they're disruptive to different transportation segments. And because then we have competitors as well. We have other car sharing companies that do exactly what we do, but they're actually not the companies that we just discussed.
What about culture? There's a culture of sharing that's taken off in the US, but other countries and certainly startups have come up against problems. Zipcar, for instance, closed and gave up. Are there not cultural problems to what you're doing in terms of what markets you can scale in?
I think those are two different things. If you're talking about what cultural kind of trends benefit sharing, and why certain companies have not been successful, I think it's things we should talk about separately. On the cultural side, I'd say in Europe even more so than the US already, you've got the big trends of post-materialism. People do no longer define themselves about what they have and what kind of car certainly they drive. It's not important. If you ask someone fresh out of college, would they rather want a car or an iPhone? They already have an iPhone. But if you ask someone fresh out of high school, maybe they would always take the iPhone. The car is no longer a status symbol. So if you live in an urban environment, the car is more a hassle than it is a status symbol. So people move beyond that, and it's more seen as a clever way, I think, to live your life. People are proud that they can save. In London, it's £3,000 on average over between owning a car and using Zipcar. You save £3,000. It was just much cheaper and a more clever alternative without any hassle. So that culture, I would say, exists here more so even than in the US. If you talk about why are certain models not successful, I think particularly in the P2P space, which Zipcar was an example of, it is very difficult to manage the balance between being comfortable sharing expensive assets. A car is not a cheap thing, and do that in a way that there is enough trust and that the transaction costs work out. So if I give you a car, I want to be sure I get it back well. It's not a decision I'm going to take lightly. If when I think about your leather jacket, would you give me a leather jacket? I'll give you
no
£5 an hour. Why not? But the issue is, you may say, £5 an hour. Why would I do that? You love your jacket. You're never going to give it away. Or you may say, you just don't trust me. Or there's something there where the idea of sharing it, same like the drill. We discussed the drill a lot, the power tool. It's not actually taken off. When it's a company sharing our cars, we have a lot of controls around what we do, so we're comfortable giving you an asset. And frankly, if you ruin our cars, you don't. But we're not going to die. If a person gives you their car, it's a real issue. If that car if that car is damaged and all that. So I think there's different things that make the sharing economy successful. And I was intrigued by the share your wardrobe example from earlier today, because where I do think there is a potential for P2P sharing to really work is in a community that already exists and has a trust that kind of is a foundation of that community. So the example was that on a college campus, girls will open up their wardrobe and share things with each other. In the example that was given, is actually more selling things kind of on a campus environment, selling their clothes. I think there's a trust already on that campus. You don't need to worry about fake items because you can just walk over and inspect it. That works well. Interesting that they started with selling and not sharing. And sharing, the issue is always, if you gave me your jacket, I want to see that it's a nice jacket, first of all, which I believe it is. And then you want to inspect it when I give it back to you. So you have twice the transaction cost for not the value of the jacket, but the 20 quid that I would give you to be able to wear it one night.
What do car manufacturers think of your business model?
They're increasingly interested in it. So you may know that we've been recently acquired by Avis Budget. So there's a huge interest of traditional kind of transport call it stakeholders in this model. Volkswagen, BMW, Daimler, they're all active in the car sharing space because they recognize the whole model of I'm going to produce a box of metal, I'm going to sell it for a really, really big price, is just not how people want to transact with them anymore. So whether it's car rental in varying forms, it's car sharing is really on the rise, kind of given that I think post-materialist trend that I was discussing, that people don't need to own things anymore.
Fast forward 10, 15 years, driverless cars. You're out of business, aren't you?
You indicated that you were going to ask me this. So look, and I said, I don't know, I'll talk to you in 10 years. You could say we are the business, right? You could say maybe we run that fleet of cars because, frankly, why would you want to own one of those driverless cars? You would want us to run them. They still need tire changes. They still need insurance.
Maybe I like a nice Mercedes on a nice driverless car.
If you want a Mercedes,
Google Mercedes.
If all of you guys want a Mercedes, I'll get you a Mercedes. What our members are telling us, they want a Polo Golf, and then sometimes they want a Touran, a 7-seater, and then sometimes they even need a transporter. Some of the benefits of Zipcars, we give you a car, to all your needs. Mercedes hasn't been at the top of people's needs. I think that's more in the materialist world where you're defining yourself with with a star on the front of the grill.
If I can have my car take me to the office and it drives itself home and picks me up later, I don't need car sharing.
You use Uber. That exists today.
What about the environment? What are you doing to address environmental concerns?
It's been a big driving factor of Zipcar from the start. What happens when one of our members starts doing car sharing is they just use a lot. They use a vehicle a lot less. When you have your car, it sits out there in the driveway anyway or on the street. You're going to use it for most of your trips. When you switch to car sharing, you're going to use public transport most of the time, which is what we want. We don't want you to use Zipcar for 90% of your trips, and frankly, you'd be better off using your own car. But when you do use car sharing, you're using public transport 90% of the time, using your car, and the number of miles that you're driving goes down 40, 60%. That's a huge benefit to the environment. And our cars are generally, they're newer, they have lower emissions, and we have some hybrids in the fleet, but the other impacts, the other effects are so big in terms of reducing emissions that even having just a pure electric fleet wouldn't quite do the same thing.
What about expansion? You have something like 700,000.
We have over 750,000 members globally.
Where are the limits to what you're doing?
I don't. Well, let's talk about where we are. We're in 20 cities around the world. London is our second biggest market. We have 1,500 cars in London, 1,600 cars.
Do you think there are limits?
I don't think 1,600 cars is very much. So if you ask me, can there be 16,000 cars? I say, well, absolutely. Think about some of the Asian cities. Think about whether it's Singapore or Tokyo or the new Chinese markets. The Chinese, in fact, have a benefit because they do control car licenses very strictly. They have a much kind of stricter hand on infrastructure, and I think once public transport, is good enough, and once the Chinese have overcome the need to really actually own a vehicle, or once they're simply not allowed to own a vehicle, I think it's really a fantastic model to evolve urban transport in those markets.
What's next?
What we're doing is we're gradually evolving the model. I think what's important to recognize is, as excited as we are about many models in the sharing economies, there hasn't been many companies that also have built strong businesses. Zipcar is not only an exciting model, but it's also a profitable model. That's been my work. So what we're evolving is to use more technologies to just make it more convenient to you. Mobile specifically is obviously the focus. Today, most of our reservations are already done on the mobile phone. So our people, more than 50% of our members use the mobile phone to make reservations. We're using the mobile phone to become more and more of your co-pilot. I think eventually you're just going to kind of look to your mobile phone to say, I've got a certain trip need, transport need, and the phone's going to help you kind of show what the right transport options are for that purpose. No one gets into any of our cars just because they like the car, right? They have an underlying trip need. So we're evolving the mobile phone for that. We're evolving different models of car sharing. But the strength of the combination with Avis is not just to strengthen the P&L, because frankly we can buy cars more cheaply, we can buy tires more cheaply, insurance is cheaper, that's all great. But the benefit is that we can offer you more choice for what trip need you have. If you want to take a car for a week, that's different than if you have the car that we have around the corner that you're going to take for 2 or 4 hours. And then there are models where you can take the car just across the city and maybe leave it there. So there's different car sharing models for trip types, kind of as we talked about in the mobility models. So we're really looking at those and expanding those, and we seek to do so internationally. So I think there's more cities that we can imagine being in.
How far can you take the technology side of this?
Technology really has two sides in our business. The one is kind of what you see on the front end. There I do think the mobile phone will continue to be the centerpiece of it for a long time. What also exists is the entire technology in the back end that makes sure that the fleet runs well, that we manage the fleet well. At the end of the day, when you do B2C car sharing, when we own assets, we have to also manage utilization. There's no use of us putting 16,000 cars into London today because many of them would sit around idle and we would lose our shirts and it wouldn't be a viable business. It's obviously important that it's a viable business so that we make money and we can continue to deliver the service. So we invest a lot into the back-end architecture that helps us manage the fleet really well, and helps us manage some of the stuff that happens when you have 1,600 cars out there and tens of thousands of members just access your cars randomly 24/7. You have to manage that.
You're of a huge size now. Do you feel that you could expand your model into other kinds of areas, other kinds of businesses?
I think we'll remain focused on mobility, but as I said, today we serve particular trip types really well. Our sweet spot is a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday morning, maybe. That's really when a lot of our cars are going out and people want to do stuff with it. What we're increasingly focusing on is actually businesses that also have a need for the cars. If you think about what cloud computing has done, it's reduced the cost of starting up a business significantly. You used to have to buy servers, put them into a technology data center, and it was actually really expensive to start an internet company. Today, that's not the case. You just pay as you go on an Amazon Web Service. We've done the same with a pretty big cost item for many kind of small businesses who used to have to own a vehicle to be able to deliver things, to be able to source things, to see clients, and they don't do this anymore. So this great, kind of one of my favorite examples is Mark, who has started a business, wasn't doing very well, started a business based on 20 quid, and gets up very early in the morning, takes one of our cars, goes to the markets. So if you want the dozen freshest oysters, or you want a couple T-bone steaks for a barbecue, Mike will get those off the market tomorrow morning. He'll deliver them to you, then when you're up. And he can do this on a very, very low cost base, since he doesn't need to own a fleet of vehicles. It's fantastic.
There's a lot of Boris bikes out there, Barclays bikes. Why don't you move into bicycles?
You should ask Boris whether it's a great business. So I think it's a great service, and I think it should belong to a city. I don't know that I can recommend it as a business idea.
Barclays seems to think it's a good advertising.
It's very, as you would imagine of Boris, very smart of having it sponsored in a very heavy way.
There could actually be a threat to you guys in the future in terms of the technology aspect of it. If I can unlock a car electronically, I can produce the car. The car effectively becomes like a platform. It's effectively a PC on wheels. What's to stop an entrepreneur here, a startup, doing a Kickstarter with a little black box on their car that other people can unlock it? There's nothing against that, right?
No, and again, that's what P2P car sharing does today. There are some P2P car sharing companies that that put technology in their cars. There are some that don't. From a business model perspective, if you put technology and you have some upfront investment costs that take some time to recoup. We have an investment in relay rides in the US, which I think does this market really well. If you ask them, I think they'd say they've been a little slower off the ground than they would like. So we do think it's an interesting area. But it kind of goes back to the dilemma we were discussing earlier, right? Whether it's your leather jacket or your car, there is a big barrier to you giving access to everybody out there to just use that vehicle. In terms of technology, I think we can be ahead of that and just continue to give an even better customer experience. You're already within 5-minute walking distance in London, anywhere you live. You can unlock our vehicles from the iPhone app. So you look on your phone where the next one is, you walk up and you press a button on your phone, the car pops open. You get in, you drive away. You're done, you come back, just put it there, and you walk off. Right? If you need to refuel, there's a fuel card in the car. Just pull up to the gas station, refuel. That's included in the price. Will we charge you £5 an hour? So it's really simple. And that's been one of the recipes for success, I think, in Zipcar. It's really simple. It always works. And we're just going to refine that customer experience and drive more innovation around it to make it even better.
Well, we're just about out of time. I thank you very much for talking to me.
Great talking to you, Mike. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you, chaps.
This way.